What's up, YouTubes? In this video, we're going to talk about how to rebuild a daggerboard. I broke mine, both of them, and I had to rebuild them. And I had no idea how to do that. Thank God I had help. First of all, I'd like to thank Lance Leonard and Ren Chapman for your help. Guys, I couldn't have done it without you. You are awesome. Now, what happened? I ran my boat aground at about 3 o'clock in the morning, and I snapped both the daggerboards off and completely messed up the bottom of the boat. If you'd like to see the repair videos and what happened, this will be the next video in the video series and the episode series coming out next week. Now, this method is good for anything in the water that takes some force, your rudders, your centerboards, your daggerboards, and it's not the one method. I'm not saying that I'm an expert on this. I just told you that I haven't done this before. But I had a very, very salty captain helping me out, and I think that we built them very well. So when I got into the yard and hauled the boat out, I took the boards out and they were snapped off right at the waterline. I laid them down underneath the boat. That's the great part about a catamaran, is I had a shaded area to work. I removed all the screws from the starboard running guides. Now, these daggerboards are 12 feet long. We could not find 12-foot long wood in good shape in Mexico. So what we could find was 8 foot. So we decided to use the old piece and use a 12-to-1 scarf into the new wood. Now I'll show you guys how we did that, what a scarf is and how to do it. But first we got to find the wood. So we went to the wood shop and we found 8-foot cedar planks. We ended up going through a whole pallet of wood trying to find the best pieces, selected the best ones, and took them home. We ended up getting the wrong length of wood.
So we made a mistake on the wood. We got the wrong length. We're gonna go in and we went through an entire pallet of wood to get these planks. But now we need the same ones, but a little bit longer. So here we go.
But at the end, we ended up getting great wood. The saw that they used at this shop that we bought the wood was kind of rinky-dink. It was rickety and was made of wood, and it wouldn't tighten down well enough to cut these pieces of wood. So we took them to another shop where they had a great table saw and a good planer, and the guy ended up cutting all the pieces into 3-inch sections and then planing the top and bottom of them for me. We ended up taking 48 pieces of 3-inch by 1-inch cedar planks back to Lance's shop, and he had a great bodega right on the beach, right near the boat, and we used that as our home base. So here's the meat and potatoes of what we did. We took these 48 pieces of wood, 24 each daggerboard, we stacked them up side by side, and we laid them out so the grains alternated every other piece. And then we wetted them down with epoxy. We then mixed up a batch of epoxy with some silicone. This is called Cabosil, and it thickens the epoxy and makes it a little stronger. We put them all together and we clamped them, and I wiped off all of the epoxy that squeezed out, all of the Cabosil and epoxy mixture that squeezed out when we clamped them together, just to make it easier to plane later. Then we planed them, we sanded them down, and we got one piece, big chunk of wood now. All epoxied together, and that epoxy is strong. Then I used a skill saw to cut the depths for the scarf. I measured out 12-to-1, that is 12 on the length for every 1 foot of thickness that we went through. So we had 3 inches thick, we ended up doing a 36-inch scarf. Then I used a hand chisel to chisel out all the biggest pieces of that, and I ended up with a rough scarf, which I planed and sanded down into a very smooth surface that we could put together with some epoxy with the other side, the old piece of wood. We had to do this again on the other side. Then the same way, we wetted it down first with just regular epoxy and then put some epoxy with Cabosil in there. And we clamped the hell out of them and let it dry. Came back the next day, took the clamps off, and we had one piece of wood now. Now we can go to shaping the wing part. In order to do the wing, I took a cross-section cut of the old daggerboard and just screwed it to the bottom of the board and used that as a template. And the same way we did the scarf, I used a skill saw to cut lengthwise all of the depths for the wing. And then I chiseled that out and used a planer and used a sander and ended up hand sanding and hand shaping the entire wing part of it. And these daggerboards are asymmetrical, so that means the wing is like an airplane. It has a little bit of lift, not just cutting through, but actually lifting in one direction. So they're unidirectional. I have to put one down and raise the other one whenever I tack. because it's always, one is pushing me to windward. And I always have the windward daggerboard down. After the daggerboards were shaped, now we're ready to fiberglass. So I'll let my buddy Ren explain the fiberglassing process, because that was a little involved, and this is a very good explanation.
We are now going to mix up the epoxy to wet the glass. Epoxy is the key ingredient. So you ever hear people say, yeah, I'm going to fiberglass something. Well, the material that we just put on and cut out is the fiberglass itself, but it doesn't actually work unless you fill it with a resin of some sort, either epoxy or polyester resin. Epoxy works better for marine applications or anything that deals with water, because it doesn't absorb moisture as easily as a polyester resin. So that's why we use an epoxy resin. The epoxy comes in two parts. It has a resin and then a catalyst, basically what they call a hardener. It's a catalyst that sets off and hardens the epoxy resin. And in this particular type of epoxy, there's lots of different types of epoxies. People make their own. But in this particular kind of epoxy, you mix it two parts resin, 1 part hardener. So let's bring it out here so Lance doesn't kill us for epoxying this floor. And I'm just going to put 2 pumps. These are evenly measured pumps. 2 pumps of resin to 1 pump of hardener. So with any kind of 2-part product, whether it be paint or epoxy, the better you mix it, the better the chemical reaction occurs on an even basis. So if I just did a little bit of mixing and part of the epoxy or part of the resin didn't mix with the hardener, then you're going to get an uneven cure of the epoxy. So it's good to just spend a little extra time mixing. Mix a lot. Lots of mixing. The prep of the surface is very, very important. You see, we've already glassed one side of this board, and in order to get the other side of the glass to stick properly, then you have to actually scratch up what you've already epoxied, because epoxy will actually have, once it cures, it'll have a kind of a waxy film on the outside, and if you add additional epoxy to it, it will not adhere. So we have to sand and prep what we've already done so that the new glass and epoxy will adhere to what we've already glassed in epoxy. So the first thing we do in this process is we're going to wet what we call wet out our surface. And then once the surface is wet, then we'll roll the glass over the top of it, and then we'll wet out the actual glass that we're putting on top. Again, the first thing we do is we're going to wet out the product that we're surfacing, and this is extremely clean and oil free.
I remember when I lost my mind. There's something so special about that place. Even your emotions had an echo in so.
So now what we're doing is wetting out the cloth. We need to get it really saturated. You can see when it's saturated, but this is thick cloth, so it needs a ton of resin. And we just keep spreading it until it's completely saturated. And it's made of glass, so it'll be fairly translucent when it's fully saturated. You should be able to see through it most of the time, right, Ren?
So after we were done fiberglassing, we wrapped everything in cellophane, waited for it to dry. After we unwrapped all the cellophane from the newly fiberglassed daggerboards, we ended up prepping that surface to be filled.
All right, that should be about all there is to do on these daggerboards. This is by far the most involved process I've done yet. This is just a layer of epoxy with filler, so we can go ahead and sand that off and sand it down smooth and then paint it. Looks about ready to rock. Just needs to be sanded and painted. That's awesome. All done.
After everything was all sanded and ready to go, we ended up painting the daggerboards with 1 coat of all grip primer and 2 coats of all grip cream colored paint, which is what my entire boat is painted with. And then the bottom half of the boards were painted with the same bottom paint as I used, just an ablative blue bottom paint. And then we installed them, and that was that. That's how we built them. All right, thank you for watching my video. If you'd like to see more of my adventures, please click on one of these 2 links, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Also, these videos are made possible by people just like you supporting me. I really, really appreciate all my patrons. Thank you so much. If you'd like to become part of the crew, please click on this link and it'll take you to my Patreon page where it's got a little introduction on who I am and what I'm doing and what you can do to help. Thank you very much. Till next time.